Imagine this. You're driving down a quiet road in Wilmington, Delaware, a place of old money and even older secrets. You make a turn, and the modern world melts away. A grand, gilded gate, an intricate masterpiece of wrought iron rises before you. It's not just a barrier, it's a declaration. As it swings open, you proceed down a long, straight avenue, a corridor of towering oaks, a path designed to humble you. And then, at the end of this magnificent natural hallway, you see it. It shimmers in the distance, a vision of impossible grandeur, a palace plucked from the Loire Valley of France and dropped into the heart of the Brandywine Valley. This is the Nemours Estate. It's not a house or a mansion in the typical American sense. It is a true European-style chateau, a fantasy of limestone and slate. It's a vision so perfect, so out of place, it feels like a dream. But as you get closer and you take in the breathtaking scale of its stone facade and the geometric perfection of its gardens, a question begins to form in your mind. Why is it here? What kind of man builds such a place? And what secrets, what sorrows are held within its silent stone walls? The numbers behind Nemours are staggering. The mansion has 77 primary rooms, over 105 in total, sprawling across nearly 47,000 square feet. The average American home could fit inside it more than 20 times over. It's larger than a professional football field. The estate itself sits on 200 acres of the most meticulously designed French formal gardens in North America, a landscape so vast it required a $39 million renovation in the early 2000s. That's more than the annual budget of a small city spent on a single garden. This isn't just a house, it's a statement of power, of wealth, of a man's iron-willed determination to have what he wanted, no matter the cost or the scandal. The story of Nemours is not one of simple opulence. It's a story born from dark history, of a forbidden love that tore one of America's most powerful families apart. It's a story of betrayal, of corporate warfare waged between cousins. It's the story of a man who built a palace for his controversial bride, a gilded cage to shield them from the judgment of a world that had cast them out. So, what was the dark secret at the heart of this Gilded Age masterpiece? Why did one of the wealthiest men in America, from a family that prized discretion, feel the need to construct such an extravagant fortress of solitude? And what really happened within these silent walls? To answer those questions, we must understand the man who willed it all into existence, a man as complex and flawed as the empire he helped build. His name was Alfred III Dupont. To understand Alfred Thermant Dupont, you have to understand the world he was born into, where his name was both a crown and a burden. The name Dupont in Delaware is a dynasty, like the Medicis in Florence or the Rockefellers in New York. The family's American saga began with Pierre Samuel Dupont de Nemours, a French economist who fled the Revolution and arrived in America in 1800. His son, Eleuthère Irénée, brought with him the sophisticated French techniques for making gunpowder. Along the banks of the Brandywine River, he founded a company that would become an industrial titan. By the time Alfred was born in 1864, the DuPont Company was the largest supplier of black powder in the United States, its fortunes built on the explosive powder that powered a growing nation. Alfred grew up in a world of unimaginable privilege, of sprawling estates and immense wealth. But it was also a world of immense pressure. He was a DuPont, and that meant a life of duty, expectation, and relentless work. The family motto was Rectitude sto, I stand in uprightness. But for Alfred, a life of simple uprightness would prove impossible. He was a man of immense appetites and passions, and he would not be constrained by the expectations of others. From a young age, Alfred seemed marked by a shadow of misfortune that would follow him throughout his life. As a boy, while swimming in the Brandywine River, he was caught in a current and nearly drowned, a terrifying brush with mortality. Soon after, a series of severe ear infections began their insidious work, progressively robbing him of his hearing. Imagine a boy growing up in a world of vibrant sounds, slowly finding himself enveloped in a thick fog of silence. This growing deafness became a defining feature of his personality. It made him introspective and observant, but it also fostered a deep-seated suspicion of others, and a stubborn, defiant independence. He couldn't always hear what people were saying, so he learned to watch them, to read their intentions, a skill that would serve him well in the cutthroat world of business. He became a master of reading lips and body language, a silent observer in a world of noise. Then came the accident. In his early 40s, during a hunting trip in 1904, a friend's shotgun accidentally discharged at close range, and Alfred was struck in the face. The damage was catastrophic. Doctors fought for weeks, but he would lose his left eye completely. Now, he was not only profoundly deaf, but partially blind. Think about the man this created. A DuPont, a scion of a powerful family, living in a world of muffled sound and diminished sight. It's a recipe for a fortress-like personality. He couldn't trust the world to be gentle, so he learned to dominate it. He became known for his fierce temper, his sharp intellect, and a ruthless streak that would both build and burn bridges. His physical limitations only seemed to fuel his ambition, as if he were determined to prove that he was more capable than any man with two good eyes and ears. His personal life was no less complicated. In 1887, he did what was expected and married his first cousin, Bessie Gardner. They had 4 children and lived in a grand home called Swamp Hall. From the outside, they were the picture of Gilded Age prosperity. But behind closed doors, the marriage was a wasteland, cold, loveless, and filled with resentment. Alfred, the isolated and intense industrialist, found little comfort in his family life. He was a man adrift, and he was desperately looking for a port in the storm. He was a man of great passions, and his marriage to Bessie was devoid of it. He craved a connection that was more than just a social contract, a partner who could match his intensity and understand the complexities of his isolated world. He found it in the most scandalous of places. Her name was Alicia Bradford. She was also his cousin, and to make matters impossibly more complicated, she was already married to a man who worked for Alfred as his personal secretary. This wasn't just an affair, it was a betrayal at every level. It was a social grenade, and Alfred was about to pull the pin, tossing it into the heart of the prim and proper DuPont dynasty. The fallout would change everything. It was this scandal, this forbidden love, that would ultimately lead to the violent demolition of one home and the magnificent, defiant creation of another. The palace we now know as Nemours. The construction of Nemours was not just an act of love. It was an act of defiance, a statement to the world that he would not be broken, that he would create his own world, a world where he and his love could be free from the judgment of others. It was a world that would be built on the foundations of scandal, and it would be a world that would be haunted by the ghosts of the past. The late 19th and early 20th centuries were a time of rigid social codes, especially among the industrial elite. For the DuPonts, family was a fortress built of discretion and propriety. Divorce was a dirty word, and public scandal was the ultimate sin. But Alfred the Fern DuPont, whose physical isolation had bred a disregard for social convention, found a kindred spirit in his cousin, Alicia Bradford, a connection he felt was worth risking everything for. Their affair was not a fleeting passion, but a deep, emotional bond that grew for years under the noses of their spouses. Alicia, vivacious and charming, was the antithesis of Alfred's reportedly cold wife, Bessie. She seemed to see past Alfred's formidable exterior, his deafness and his glass eye, connecting with the brilliant, lonely man within. Their shared ancestry as cousins created an immediate bond, but the connection that grew between them was something far more dangerous. During Alfred's painful recovery from the hunting accident that took his eye, their secret love solidified. While his own wife was absent, it was Alicia who sat by his bedside, becoming his link to the world. An intimacy grew that could no longer be denied. But this was not a simple love story. It was a tangled mess of loyalty and betrayal. Alicia was married to George Maddox, Alfred's own employee and secretary. The Maddoxes lived in a home provided by Alfred, who was a constant, powerful presence in their marriage. The family already whispered about the close relationship between the industrialist and his secretary's wife. The situation was a powder keg, and in 1906, Alfred lit the fuse. He divorced Bessie. The move was swift and brutal. He filed on grounds of extreme cruelty and inhuman treatment, a shocking public accusation. He gave Bessie and their 4 children 1 week's notice to vacate their home, Swamp Hall. Then, in an act of unimaginable coldness, he had the house razed to the ground, erasing it from the face of the earth. This act of destruction was a declaration of war, turning much of the family, who saw it as a cruel humiliation of a DuPont, irrevocably against him. But Alfred was just getting started. The demolition of his old life was merely the prelude to constructing his new one. He needed Alicia to be free. What happened next is shrouded in family lore, but the outcome is clear. Alfred allegedly paid his secretary, George Maddox, a staggering sum, rumored to be $1 million, to quietly divorce Alicia and disappear. Maddox, a man of modest means, was caught in an impossible position. He took the deal. Just 2 weeks after Alicia's divorce was finalized, she and Alfred were married in a small private ceremony in 1907. The scandal was immense. The DuPont family, who had built their reputation on stability and privacy, was now the subject of lurid headlines. Alfred and his new wife Alicia became social pariahs. They were shunned at family gatherings, their names struck from guest lists. The family's formidable matriarchs closed ranks, rallying around the exiled Bessie. This only further isolated Alfred. He responded in his typical fashion, with overwhelming force, filing slander lawsuits against his own family members, legal battles that only deepened the wounds and turned the family feud into a public spectacle. Alfred, already isolated by his deafness and blindness, was now an outcast from his own tribe. He had his fortune and his bride, but he had lost his place in the world he was born to rule. He needed a new world, a kingdom of his own, a place so grand it would silence the whispers and prove his triumph. He needed to build a monument to his love and his defiance. He needed to build Nemours. He chose a 300-acre plot in Wilmington, a sprawling property that would give him the privacy he craved. He hired the most sought-after architects of the day, Carrere and Hastings, masterminds behind the New York Public Library. The instructions were simple. Build a palace, a French chateau in the style of Louis XVI, beloved by his new wife, Alicia. It was to be a gift for her, a golden fortress to protect her from the scorn of the world. Construction began in 1909 and was completed in just over a year, a testament to Alfred's impatient will. The result was breathtaking. A 77-room mansion filled with the finest 18th-century French furniture, priceless art, and rare antiques. He acquired a rare musical clock built for Marie Antoinette and even a chair from Independence Hall. This was not just a home. It was a curated museum of European aristocracy, a deliberate attempt to graft the prestige of the old world onto his new, controversial life. And then there were the gardens. Inspired by the opulent gardens of Versailles, they were the largest of their kind in North America. A grand central avenue stretched for 1/3 of a mile, lined with fountains reflecting pools and classical statues. There was an intricate maze garden, a dramatic sunken garden with grottos, and a romantic temple of love. It was a fantasy world, a paradise designed to make the outside world that had rejected them seem small and insignificant. Nemours was Alfred's answer to his critics, a declaration in stone and marble that he was more powerful than any of them. He had been cast out of the family Eden, so he built his own, grander one. But as the saying goes, even in paradise, serpents can be found. The grand palace was built, the scandal weathered, but the dark history of Nemours was just beginning. The magnificent home, meant to be a sanctuary for a new family, would soon become a place of profound and heartbreaking loss. Nemours was complete. A magnificent, sprawling palace, a declaration of love and defiance rendered in limestone and gold leaf. From the outside, it appeared that Alfred and Alicia had won their war against the world. They had weathered the firestorm of their affair and scandalous divorces, and now resided in a home grander and more splendid than any of their detractors. They had created their own private kingdom, a fortress of luxury designed to keep the hostile, judgmental world at bay. But walls built to keep others out can also, in time, become a prison. And the grand sun-drenched halls of Nemours, which were meant to be filled with the joy and laughter of a new family, would soon echo with a profound and heartbreaking silence. Alfred and Alicia had desperately wanted children of their own. A child would have been the ultimate vindication of their union, a new branch of the Dupont dynasty to legitimize their controversial marriage and inherit the extraordinary world they had built. Soon after their wedding, their most fervent wish seemed to be granted. Alicia gave birth to a child. The nursery at Nemours, no doubt filled with the finest toys and clothes from Europe, was ready. But their joy was tragically, cruelly short-lived. The infant, a fragile life in the face of so much stone and marble, did not survive. A few years later, they were blessed with a second child, another chance at the family they so desperately desired. But fate, it seemed, was relentlessly, almost sadistically, cruel to Alfred Furter Dupont. This child, too, was lost. Imagine the weight of that grief within these gilded walls, a palace built for a queen and her heirs, now a silent, opulent testament to a double tragedy. The whispers of the outside world, the judgment of the family, the sting of social exclusion, all of it must have felt insignificant compared to this private, devastating, and repeated loss. The very foundation of Nemours, the hope for a new beginning and a new legacy, was cracked. The estate was no longer just a sanctuary, it was a mausoleum for their lost dreams. This deep personal tragedy added another layer to the estate's mysterious aura. It was a place born of scandal, and now it had been consecrated by sorrow. The silence in its grand rooms was no longer just peaceful. It was heavy. Life at Nemours became a carefully managed performance, a play staged for an audience of two. Upstairs, it was a world of European elegance, of formal receptions for the few who dared to visit, and a quiet, almost brittle dignity. But downstairs, in the unseen labyrinthine depths of the mansion, a different reality existed. Alfred, ever the industrialist, the engineer, the master of systems, had designed Nemours to be a completely self-sufficient world, a closed loop of production and consumption. The basement was not the dark, dusty cellar of a typical Gilded Age home. It was the humming, thrumming engine room of the entire estate, a sprawling, multi-level complex that revealed the true, unvarnished nature of the man who built it. This was Alfred's domain. Here, far from the social pressures and the quiet grief of the upstairs world, he could be himself, the inventor, the tinkerer, the master of his own universe. The basement contained a massive industrial-scale bottling plant where fresh water from the estate's own natural spring was carbonated, bottled, and capped, ready to be shipped in wooden crates to the DuPonts wherever they might be traveling in the world. There was a huge ice-making facility, a state-of-the-art electrical plant powerful enough to light up a small town, and fully equipped workshops for every conceivable need: plumbing, electrical, woodworking. It was a microcosm of the industrial empire he had once helped to run, a world of efficiency, logic, and control. But it was also his personal retreat, his ultimate man cave, a place of escape and solitary pursuits. There was a large, handsome billiards room for entertainment, a fully equipped dark room where he could indulge his passion for photography, and a gymnasium with the latest, most modern fitness equipment. And at its heart was his private office, a spacious wood-paneled command center from which he could manage his vast financial empire, far from the prying eyes of even his own family. This subterranean world speaks volumes about Alfred's psyche. He needed control. In a life where he had lost control of his hearing, his sight, and his social standing, a life marked by the ultimate loss of control over life and death itself, he built a world where he could control everything, right down to the temperature of the water and the electricity humming through the walls. Nemours wasn't just a home, it was a machine for living, and he was its chief engineer. This incredible self-sufficiency required a huge, invisible army. Life at Nemours was a classic upstairs-downstairs drama, played out on a massive scale. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of servants were needed to maintain the illusion of effortless elegance that Alfred and Alicia required. Maids, butlers, cooks, chauffeurs, footmen, laundresses, gardeners, and maintenance workers populated the estate, living in their own separate quarters, operating on their own strict schedules, their lives dedicated to the comfort and, above all, the privacy of the master and mistress. They were the silent witnesses to the life within the mansion, privy to the quiet sadness that hung in the air, the unspoken tensions, and the profound, almost suffocating isolation of its owners. They saw the uneaten meals return to the kitchen. They heard the long silences between husband and wife. They tended the gardens that were so rarely visited by guests. For all its grandeur, for all its breathtaking beauty, life at Nemours was a lonely one. The joyous laughter of children did not fill its halls. The grand dining room, which could seat dozens of guests, was often empty save for the solitary figures of Alfred and Alicia, dining in near silence, their conversation perhaps limited by his profound deafness. The endless, magnificent gardens were their private sanctuary, but they were also their gilded cage. They had each other, a bond forged in scandal and strengthened by shared grief, but they had paid a steep, almost unbearable price for their love. The reality of life in their palace was a far cry from the vibrant, happy fairy tale they had hoped to build. It was a life of immense wealth and unimaginable privilege, yes, but it was also a life defined by loss, by isolation, and by the constant quiet hum of the massive, powerful machine Alfred had built to keep the world, and perhaps his own sorrow, at a safe and manageable distance. The house was a marvel of engineering, but it could not engineer happiness. It could generate its own power, but it could not generate life. The reality of Nemours was that it was a beautiful, perfect, and profoundly empty stage for a quiet tragedy. For a time, it seemed the gilded cage of Nemours had served its purpose. Alfred and Alicia, though still social outcasts within the rigid hierarchy of the Dupont clan, had created a world unto themselves, a fortress of opulence and privacy that was impervious to the slings and arrows of their critics. But the forces that had been set in motion by Alfred's scandalous divorce and remarriage were far from finished with him. The family drama, which had been confined to drawing rooms and hushed gossip, was about to spill over into the one place Alfred felt truly invincible: the boardroom. The consequences would be catastrophic, the crisis that would ultimately define the second half of our eighth. Alfred's life was not one of love or personal loss, but of power, a brutal internecine war for the soul of the Dupont Empire. Alfred had dedicated his life to the E.I. Dupont de Nemours and Company. He was not some idle dilettante, a rich man's son playing at business. He was a brilliant, innovative chemist and engineer, a man who held numerous patents that had modernized the company's production of smokeless powder and made it wildly, almost unimaginably, profitable. He had started his career on the factory floor, learning the business from the ground up, his hands stained with the chemicals that were the source of his family's wealth. Alongside his cousins, the cool and calculating Pierre S. Dupont and the ambitious expansionist T. Coleman Dupont, he had orchestrated a daring buyout of the entire company in 1902, saving it from being sold to outsiders and consolidating the family's control for a new generation. He was not just an heir. He was a pillar of the empire, its vice president, a director, and the driving force behind much of its technical and financial success. But the family scandal had poisoned the well. His relationship with his cousins, particularly the emotionally distant and morally rigid Pierre, had grown dangerously strained. They disapproved of his personal life, viewing his divorce and remarriage as a stain on the family's honor. Alfred, in turn, resented their hypocrisy with a burning, visceral passion. He saw them as men who were more than happy to profit from his brilliance in the boardroom while shunning him in the drawing room. Men who would gladly cash the dividend checks his innovations had generated while simultaneously treating his wife as a social leper. The tension simmered for years, a corporate Cold War waged in hushed tones, passive-aggressive memos, and sideways glances across the long mahogany table of the executive committee. The breaking point, the moment the Cold War turned hot, came in 1914. T. Coleman Dupont, the company's president and one of the three cousins who controlled the firm, announced that, due to ill health, he was resigning and intended to sell his massive block of company stock. This was a seismic event. Coleman's shares represented a significant portion of the company's ownership, and if they were to fall into the hands of competitors, it could mean the end of the Dupont family's absolute control over their own empire. To prevent this, Alfred, Ever the loyal company man immediately began to organize a plan for the company itself to buy Coleman's shares, a move that would benefit all the existing shareholders equally. It was a logical, fair, and prudent course of action, but Pierre S. Dupont had other ideas. In a move of stunning, almost breathtaking corporate maneuvering, Pierre went behind Alfred's back. He secretly formed his own private syndicate, which included many of the key family members who had sided against Alfred in his divorce, and using the company's own credit and resources, bought Coleman's stock for himself and his allies. In an instant, with a few strokes of a pen, Pierre became the company's largest single shareholder, seizing absolute, unchallengeable control. The move was so swift, so audacious, and so brilliantly executed that Alfred didn't see it coming until it was too late. Alfred was blindsided, and his shock quickly turned to a white-hot rage. He saw it as the ultimate betrayal, a stab in the back not just from a business partner, but from a cousin, from family. He believed with every fiber of his being that Pierre had used the family's personal animosity towards him as a weapon, orchestrating a corporate coup to enrich himself and his cronies while robbing the other shareholders, including Alfred, of their rightful share of the company's value. To Alfred, this wasn't just business, it was a deeply personal attack, a final decisive blow in the long, bitter war that had started with his love for Alicia. He refused to stand for it. He would not be pushed out of the company his great-grandfather had founded. He launched a massive public lawsuit against Pierre, accusing him of treachery, conspiracy, and fraud. The Dupont family, one of the most powerful and ferociously private dynasties in America, was now airing its dirtiest laundry in open court for all the world to see. The legal battle was epic, a clash of titans that captivated the nation. It was cousin against cousin, fortune against fortune, a real-life soap opera played out on the front pages of every newspaper in the country. Alfred, the deaf and half-blind warrior, fought with a ferocity that stunned his opponents. He poured his own money into the fight, hiring the best lawyers he could find. He took the stand himself, his powerful voice, accustomed to shouting to be heard, booming across the courtroom as he laid out his accusations of betrayal. But he had underestimated the power and influence of the Dupont establishment and the deep-seated prejudice against him. The Delaware courts, and indeed much of the state's political and financial elite, were heavily influenced by the Duponts, and Pierre, the calm, respectable, and socially unimpeachable leader of the family, was the face of that establishment. The court's decision was a foregone conclusion. It sided with Pierre. Alfred lost. It was a crushing, humiliating, and absolute defeat. He was publicly disgraced and, for all intents and purposes, forced out of the company he had given his life to. The family he had been born into, the business that was his birthright, had cast him out completely and irrevocably. This was the ultimate crisis. He was in his 50s, an outcast from his family and an exile from his own company. He still had his immense fortune, but his life's purpose had been stripped away. The magnificent estate of Nemours, once a proud symbol of his defiance and success, now felt like a hollow monument to his defeat, its long, empty corridors a constant reminder of his isolation. And then, as if the fates had not been cruel enough, the final, most personal tragedy struck. In 1920, his beloved Alicia, the woman for whom he had risked everything, the woman for whom he had built this palace, the anchor of his tumultuous life, died after a long illness. Now he was truly, utterly alone, a king in a vast empty castle surrounded by the ghosts of his lost children, his lost love, and his lost empire. The silence in Nemours was no longer just heavy. It was absolute. The machine for living had finally, completely broken down. For any other man, this would have been the end. This would have been the point where the story fades to black, a retreat into a bitter, lonely old age, a man left to rattle around a silent mansion, counting his money and his regrets. But Alfred Darcy Dupont was not any other man. He had been beaten, he had been betrayed, he had been heartbroken, but he was not broken. The deafness, the blindness, the betrayals, they had not destroyed him. They had forged him in a fire of resentment and resilience that was harder than steel. He would not give his enemies the satisfaction of watching him fade away into obscurity. He would reinvent himself. He took his vast fortune, his still razor-sharp mind, and his unyielding will, and he left Delaware, the land of his ancestors and his enemies, behind him. He moved to the swampy, undeveloped backwater of Florida, and he started over. The crisis was not the end of his story. It was the beginning of his most enduring, his most surprising, and his most redemptive chapter. The Dark History of Nemours Estate, America's Most Mysterious Gilded Age Mansion, Part 5. Alfred the Sieur Dupont arrived in Florida in the early 1920s, a man in his late 50s, a king without a kingdom, a general without an army. He had been stripped of his corporate crown, exiled from his ancestral home, and widowed by the woman for whom he had sacrificed everything. He was a wounded lion, but a lion nonetheless, and the roar was still in him. He saw in the undeveloped, often dismissed landscape of Florida what others did not, a blank canvas. He saw potential where others saw swamp. He saw a future where others saw a backwater. This was not a retreat. It was a redeployment. He began buying vast tracts of land, not with the cautious speculation of a typical investor, but with the voracious appetite of a nation builder. He acquired millions of acres across the Florida Panhandle, often for pennies on the dollar. But he wasn't just buying land. He was building a new financial empire from the ground up, one that would be entirely his own, free from the influence and the judgment of his Delaware family. He established a chain of banks, the Florida National Bank, which would grow to become a dominant force in the state's economy, providing the capital that would fuel its explosive growth in the coming decades. He invested in paper mills, recognizing the immense, untapped value of Florida's vast pine forests. He built roads, he financed businesses, he laid the groundwork for entire towns. He was no longer just a gunpowder magnate. He was a creator of a modern state, a founding father of 20th century Florida. This furious activity was more than just good business. It was a form of therapy, a way to channel his still prodigious energy and his burning resentment into something constructive. Every bank he opened, every acre he purchased was a silent message sent north to his cousins in Delaware. It was a declaration that he could not be broken, that his genius was not dependent on their company or their approval. He was building a new empire from scratch, a second kingdom that would one day rival and perhaps even surpass the one he had been forced to leave behind. But this new chapter was not just about business and revenge. It was also about finding a new kind of peace, a final act of personal redemption, and that came in the form of his third wife, Jessie Ball. Jessie Ball was a different woman entirely from the two who had preceded her. She was not a Dupont cousin, not a product of the same insular, high-stakes world. She was a schoolteacher from a respected but modest Virginia family, a woman of quiet strength, unshakable integrity, and deep, genuine compassion. She was 20 years his junior, and they had known each other for years, a long, slow-burning friendship that now, in the twilight of Alfred's life, blossomed into a profound and transformative love. They married in 1921, and in Jessie, Alfred found not just a wife, but a partner, a confidant, and a guide. Jessie was not a society queen like Alicia, nor a symbol of dynastic duty like Bessie. She was a practical, down-to-earth woman who was utterly unfazed by Alfred's immense wealth and his formidable, often intimidating personality. She became his anchor in a sea of silence. She became his eyes and, most importantly, his ears, his living connection to the world that his deafness and blindness had cut him off from. She would sit in on his most complex business meetings, her chair pulled up close to his, patiently and precisely repeating every word of the conversation into his ear so he could follow. Her calm voice, the one clear channel in his world of muffled sound. She managed their households, both their new, more relaxed home in Florida and the still grand and imposing Nemours in Delaware, with a practical efficiency that the great estate had never known. She brought warmth and life back into the silent halls, but most importantly, she seemed to heal the deep, festering bitterness that had consumed him for so long. She softened his hardened edges, calmed his explosive temper, and guided his immense fortune and his still brilliant intellect toward a new, more noble purpose: philanthropy. It was under Jessie's gentle but persistent influence that Alfred began to think seriously about his legacy. about what would become of his vast fortune when he was gone. What was the point of it all? He had no surviving children of his own. His adopted daughter, Alicia Maddox, was grown and had her own life. He had no desire to leave his hard-won second empire to the family members in Delaware who had betrayed him. He wanted to create something that would last, something that would do good in the world, something that would perhaps in some small way atone for a life of conflict and sorrow. The solution he and Jessie devised together was as grand, as complex, and as meticulously engineered as the Nemours Estate itself. He spent the last years of his life crafting his last will and testament, a document that would become one of the most significant and visionary philanthropic charters in American history. This was his final, grandest project, more complex than any corporate merger, more personal than any architectural blueprint. He created the Alfred DuPont Testamentary Trust, and the primary mission of this trust, the very heart of his legacy, was not to build more mansions or to fund art museums or to endow universities. It was to provide for the care of crippled children and the elderly in need, particularly in Delaware and Florida. Think about the profound, almost poetic justice of that. A man who had spent his entire life battling his own physical ailments, the near drowning that had scarred his lungs, the deafness that had plunged him into silence, the blindness that had stolen half his sight, chose to dedicate his entire fortune to alleviating the physical suffering of others. A man whose own children had been lost to him in infancy, whose grand home was a silent monument to that loss, chose to become a father to thousands of sick and vulnerable children he would never meet. This was the ultimate solution, the final brilliant move in the long, complicated chess game of his life. The pain and isolation that had defined so much of his existence were transformed into a powerful, enduring engine for compassion. The vast fortune that had been a source of so much conflict and division would now become a source of healing and hope. In his will, he stipulated that the trust should maintain the Nemours Estate and its magnificent gardens for the pleasure and benefit of the public, ensuring that its beauty would be shared, but he made it clear that its primary purpose, the reason for its continued existence, was to support the charitable mission. The palace of private sorrow would become a beacon of public good. Alfred Dupont died in 1935 at the age of 70. He passed away at his beloved Florida home, Epping Forest, with Jessie, his partner and his guide, by his side. His body was returned to Delaware, and he was interred in a grand mausoleum on the grounds of his most famous and most troubled creation. He was finally at rest, a lonely, defiant king laid to sleep in his silent palace, the long, tumultuous battle of his life finally over. So what, in the end, is the legacy of Nemours Estate, America's most mysterious Gilded Age mansion? What is the answer to the questions that hang in the air as you stand before its breathtaking facade? Its dark history is not one of ghosts or hauntings in the traditional sense, not of spectral figures gliding down hallways or mysterious bumps in the night. The ghosts of Nemours are the echoes of a tumultuous life, the lingering psychic residue of a man's epic struggles against his family, his own body, and his fate. It is haunted by the ghost of a forbidden, all-consuming love that defied every convention of his time, by the tiny, tragic ghosts of lost children who never had the chance to fill its halls with laughter, by the bitter, angry ghost of a family empire torn apart by betrayal and corporate warfare. The central mystery of why it was built is, in the end, the story of Alfred Dupont himself. It was a fortress against a hostile world, a monument to a defiant love, a gilded cage for a man who could never truly escape the profound, crushing isolation of his own body and his own heart. But the story of Nemours, remarkably, does not end with Alfred's death. In a final, beautiful irony, the solution he created in his will, the transformation of his private fortune into a public trust, gave the estate a new life, a new purpose, a redemption far grander than he could have ever imagined. In accordance with his wishes, the Nemours Foundation was established, and on the grounds of the estate, just a stone's throw from the opulent mansion, the first Nemours Children's Hospital was built. The very land that was once a symbol of private wealth, of social exclusion, of a man turning his back on the world, became a place of healing, a sanctuary for the most vulnerable among us. The quiet, lonely gardens that were once the private domain of a reclusive, grieving millionaire now provide a place of peace and respite for the anxious families of sick children. The dark history, the pain, and the sorrow became the fertile ground from which a legacy of hope could grow. Yet, even in this redemption, the shadows of the past linger, a reminder that the story is never truly over. The dark history of Nemours continued long after Alfred was gone, as the immense wealth he left behind became, once again, a source of conflict. His will, which he had intended to be a clear and final declaration of his purpose, became the subject of intense, bitter legal battles. In a dramatic turn of events in 2012, the state of Delaware filed a lawsuit against the Nemours Foundation, the very organization Alfred had created. The state claimed that the trustees, who were spending millions of dollars a year on the lavish upkeep of the mansion and gardens, were mismanaging the funds and betraying the spirit of the will. The Attorney General at the time, the late Beau Biden, argued passionately that the trust's primary duty was not to maintain a Gilded Age palace, but to fulfill its sacred mission, the care of children and the elderly. It was a fight that echoed Alfred's own legal battles, a powerful reminder that where there is great wealth, there is always conflict, always a struggle between private interests and the public good. The foundation, in its defense, argued that maintaining the estate was a specific directive in the will, and that the historic landmark was a valuable public asset in its own right. The legal battle raged for years, a modern-day echo of the family feuds that had defined Alfred's life, proving that the questions of legacy and intent are never truly settled. Today, the Nemours Estate stands as a complex, fascinating, and deeply moving contradiction. It is both a breathtakingly beautiful museum, a perfectly preserved time capsule of a lost world of unimaginable luxury, and a functioning, vital part of a modern healthcare system. It is a monument to the Gilded Age's most extravagant excesses, a testament to the enduring power of philanthropy. It is a place of public access, yet it still holds its secrets close. Only 3 of the mansion's 4 floors are open to the public. The basement, Alfred's private subterranean kingdom, the engine room of his isolated world, remains largely unseen, its mysteries intact. The hidden corners of the vast gardens, the quiet grottos and forgotten statues still whisper the stories of the past to those who are willing to listen. It is a place where you can marvel at the craftsmanship of a bygone era and then walk a few hundred yards and see the cutting edge of modern medicine at work. A place where the past is not just preserved, but actively engaged in a dialogue with the present. As you walk through its grand, silent halls and its meticulously manicured gardens, you can't help but feel the immense weight of its history. You can almost hear the silent, determined footsteps of the man who built it, a man who was deaf to the world, but who listened to the fierce, often contradictory desires of his own heart, no matter the cost. The dark history of Nemours is the story of a man's lifelong quest for love, for power, and finally, for a redemption that he could only find in giving everything away. It is a quintessentially American story, a story of ambition, of conflict, of reinvention, a story written in stone and steel, in scandal and sorrow, and ultimately in the laughter of the children who now play in the long, benevolent shadow of America's most mysterious Gilded Age mansion. The story of Nemours is a testament to the idea that even the darkest histories can, in the end, lead to a future filled with light. It is a story that proves that the legacy we leave behind is not defined by the walls we build to protect ourselves, but by the doors we open for others.